Welcome to Talegrove, where every story grows roots and every lesson touches the heart.
No one announced his arrival. They never had to. The moment his footsteps touched the red earth, the village changed. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Laughter died like a candle blown out by the wind. Mothers pulled their children closer, gripping small hands with sudden urgency. Doors that had been open all morning creaked shut, one after another, as if the village itself was holding its breath. It was not because the man was strong. It was not because he was wise. It was because power walked behind him, unseen but heavy. In the market, traders pretended to be busy, their eyes fixed on weighing scales that no longer mattered. Coins stopped clinking. Bargaining voices disappeared. A woman who had been laughing moments ago lowered her head and whispered, "He's here," as if speaking louder might invite trouble. An old man sitting under the neem tree cleared his throat nervously. "Say nothing," he murmured to those beside him. "Silence is safer." The wind carried dust across the narrow paths. Chickens scattered. A dog that had been barking suddenly went quiet, its tail tucked between its legs. Even the air felt tense, thick with warning. Children, who should have been running freely, stood frozen. One small boy tugged his mother's wrapper and asked in a trembling voice, "Mama, why is everyone quiet?" His mother did not answer. She only tightened her grip. From behind half-closed windows, eyes watched him pass. No one dared to greet him. No one dared to challenge him. His name was never spoken openly, not because it was forgotten, but because it carried consequences. Fear had become a language the village spoke fluently. This was a place where people once sang in the evenings, where stories were shared by firelight and neighbors called each other by name. But now, fear decided when mouths could open and when they must close. And as the man walked on, confident and unbothered, one truth echoed silently through every heart. This village no longer belonged to its people. It belonged to power. And power, for now, was winning. Unseen by him, watched by everyone, the seed of a story far greater than fear had already been planted, waiting for the day protection would finally fail. Kola's laughter echoed through the grand hall of his father's mansion, bouncing off the polished walls that gleamed like sunlight on river water. Outside, the dusty paths of the village stretched lazily under the scorching midday sun. Villagers passed by the iron gates with careful steps, eyes lowered, hearts heavy with a mix of fear and curiosity. They had learned long ago that the boy who roamed these halls was no ordinary child. Kola kicked over a wooden stool, sending it crashing against the marble floor. Again, he shouted, pointing at a tutor who had barely managed to finish a lesson on numbers. "I said again. You think I will stay here wasting time on this nonsense?" The tutor swallowed hard, bowing low. "Master Kola." Kola cut him off with a harsh laugh. "No one dares call me master outside. Here, I am everything. You understand?" His father, a man whose wealth shaped the roads and markets of the surrounding villages, stepped into the room with a calm but heavy presence. His shoes clicked on the polished floor, a sound that had grown familiar to Kola, almost like a drum announcing immunity. "Kola," he said softly, "enough for today. Let the boy breathe." Breathe. The word meant little to Kola. He had never known consequence. If he tripped over a neighbor's goats, it was his father who handed over the money before any complaint reached the elders. If he shouted insults at the village chief's son, it was merely a lesson in etiquette the following morning, softened with a gift from his father's wealth. From the open veranda, the dusty sunlit village seemed distant, almost unreal. Children played cautiously, elders shook their heads at mischief that never stayed punished. Kola, perched on the grand staircase, grinned, surveying it all. "Why should I suffer," he said aloud, "when the world bends for me anyway?" His father smiled faintly, a shadow of pride mingled with worry crossing his face. He knew the dangers of power, but also the intoxicating effect it had on youth. Kola would not listen to warnings. He would not understand respect until life forced him to. And as the day's golden light faded into the horizon, Kola strode toward the balcony, tossing coins into the courtyard below for servants to scramble after. The lesson he had learned, no mistake, no matter how cruel or bold, would ever touch him, was now etched deep into his heart. The village, still watching silently from afar, would soon realize that this boy's power would grow unchecked. And unchecked power, as they would learn, can only invite disaster. The sun rose high over the dusty rooftops of Ao village, burning through the morning mist that clung stubbornly to the earth. The market, once a lively place filled with the smells of fresh yam, roasted maize, and spicy suya, now moved like a cautious river, slow, careful, and fearful. Traders peeked over baskets of vegetables and grains, their eyes darting toward the gate, knowing he could appear at any moment. Kola strolled through the market, his steps deliberate, his chest puffed out like a young king claiming territory. The breeze did nothing to cool the simmering heat of the village. If anything, it carried the whispers of fear like seeds into every corner. "You call this yesterday's harvest?" he shouted at a trader selling tomatoes. He grabbed a few, smashed them under his sandals, and tossed the rest into the dust. The trader's hands trembled. I'm sorry, sir," he whispered. A woman carrying a basket of peppers froze, her children clinging to her skirts. Kola snatched a few peppers and flung them into the dirt. "Keep quiet," he barked. "You think your screams mean anything here?" From under the shade of a neem tree, elders watched, their hands gripping walking sticks as if they could somehow channel courage through wood. But the law, the king, and even common sense seemed powerless. Complaints vanished before they were spoken, reports disappeared before they reached ears of authority. The village was learning the hardest lesson: sometimes silence was survival. An old man muttered to another, "We cannot speak, he will ruin us if we do." The younger man nodded, eyes downcast, heart heavy. Even the children had stopped playing freely, running only when adults were near, their laughter muffled like a secret being hidden from the world. Kola laughed, a sharp, careless sound that cut through the marketplace like the crack of a whip. He moved on, leaving destruction behind, baskets overturned, fresh produce trampled, dignity shattered. And the village followed in. Quiet footsteps, hearts pounding, afraid even to look up. By midday, the sun hung over the dusty streets, and the silence was complete. The market had become a stage for fear. No voice rose. No hand protested. The people had learned to bend to power, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. And somewhere deep in the village, a single thought stirred among the elders: this cannot last forever. The sun dipped low over Ao village, painting the dusty streets in streaks of orange and gold. Shadows stretched lazily across the market square, yet the usual warmth of evening had vanished. Kola stood in the center, laughing loudly, a cruel echo that seemed to swallow every quiet sound. Before him, the small family he had humiliated crouched on the ground, their heads bent, tears glistening in the fading light. Their goats had been scattered, their market goods trampled, and their pride shattered. From the edge of the square, a figure approached slowly. His steps were measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of decades. This was Baba Ojo, the village caretaker, a man who had spent his life guiding the people in small but meaningful ways. He did not carry a staff like a priest, nor chant over a shrine. His power was the respect earned through honesty and unwavering wisdom. He cleared his throat softly. "Kola," his voice, calm yet firm, cut through the boys' laughter. "Do you not see what you are doing? Do you not understand that what is borrowed from injustice cannot last forever?" Kola turned sharply, his eyes narrowing, a sneer forming across his face. "What nonsense are you spouting, old man?" he barked, stepping closer. The villagers instinctively drew back, leaving a small circle of dust between the two. "I speak only truth," Baba Ojo said, unflinching. "Power built on fear, on lies, on the suffering of others, it always expires. One day, even the strongest walls cannot protect the guilty." Kola laughed, a harsh, booming sound that rang across the square. "Walls?" he mocked, pointing to his father's mansion glinting in the sunlight. "I don't need walls. I don't need laws. And you, you are nothing but an old man with words. He raised a hand and struck the ground near Baba Ojo's feet, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Learn this, everyone. Kola shouted, his voice dripping with arrogance. Power bends the world for me, and nothing you say can change it. The caretaker's eyes remained steady, though the veins in his hands twitched from suppressed anger. Around them, the villagers held their breaths, sensing the first whisper of a storm that even Kola could not yet see. As Kola turned and strode away, tossing a basket into the dirt, a hush fell over the market. The words lingered in the air, a warning carried not by fear, but by truth. Power borrowed from injustice always expires. And though Kola did not know it, the seed of his reckoning had just been planted. The nights in Ao village had grown restless. The cicadas that once droned in steady rhythm now seemed uneven, twitching as if the earth itself had caught a shiver. Kola tossed in his grand bed, the silk sheets tangling around his legs, his body sweating despite the cool evening breeze drifting through open windows. For the first time, the usual comfort of his father's wealth, of guards, of unchecked influence, could not calm him. Earlier that day, a servant had stumbled carrying a tray of food. Nothing unusual, except that Kola had grabbed it midair, spilling the stew onto the marble floor. He had cursed, yet his hands trembled slightly, a subtle tremor, almost invisible. What is happening? He whispered, glancing at his reflection in the polished mirror. Why do I feel so weak? His father, ever composed, leaned against the doorway. Rest, Kola. You are tired. Perhaps too much sun today. Kola shook his head. It's not the sun. I can't explain it. He rubbed his temples, a faint nausea curling in his stomach. Something feels wrong. The doctors summoned from the city frowned as they examined him. They found nothing, yet Kola's complaints persisted: sudden dizziness, blurred vision, even strange, fleeting nightmares where shadows moved in impossible ways. Perhaps stress, one assistant suggested hesitantly, but Kola knew it was more than that. He began pacing the balcony of his mansion at night, the village below silent and distant, lanterns flickering like tiny, trembling stars. His footsteps were heavy but uneven, betraying the restlessness in his mind. The shadows of the neem trees seemed longer, darker, more accusing than before. He had never felt fear, never in his life, but now it slithered quietly, like a cat in the corner of his mind, watching, waiting. His father observed him silently, the weight of unspoken worry settling on his shoulders. Even money, even influence, could not explain this subtle shift. Kola, the boy who had walked through life untouchable, now felt a tremor in his armor, a crack, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. For the first time, he wondered if power alone could keep him safe. And in that quiet, uneasy moment, the balance began to tilt. Something was coming, something that wealth could not buy, and even Kola, arrogant and cruel, could sense it approaching. The wind whispered through the open windows, carrying the hint of an end he had never imagined. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the private hospital room, but even the strongest smell could not mask the sharp, metallic tang of fear that clung to the air. Kola lay on the bed, propped up by pillows that seemed to weigh more than his body. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath shallow, as if the very act of living had become a burden. The boy who once roamed the village like a storm now trembled under the weight of helplessness. Doctors in crisp white coats conferred quietly at the foot of the bed, charts in hand, murmuring in tones heavy with concern. We've administered every treatment, one said, shaking his head. Nothing is working. His condition, it is deteriorating. Kola's father paced near the window, the evening sun casting his long shadow across the room. Try harder, he barked, his voice tight with frustration. Money is not an obstacle. You have every resource, every medicine, every specialist. Fix him. One young assistant met his gaze nervously. Sir, we've brought in experts from the city. We've flown in foreign specialists and experimental treatments. We've done everything we can think of. Kola coughed, weakly at first, then louder, his voice cracking. I can't breathe properly, he whispered. Even speaking drained him of energy. The same hands that once struck fear into traitors, that tore through the market like a whirlwind, now shook helplessly on the bed sheets. His father's face, usually so proud and composed, twisted into disbelief. This cannot be, he muttered, staring at stacks of papers detailing the bills, the specialists, the imported drugs. He had spent a fortune on protection, influence, and medicine. Yet nothing could change what was happening. Cola's eyes, once sharp and cruel, now looked toward the nurses with a mixture of pleading and shame. He reached for them instinctively, grasping their hands as if they were lifelines. The irony of the moment was bitter. The people he had tormented, the villagers he had mocked, were now the ones he depended on for survival. A faint shiver ran through him as the reality sank in. The power that had shielded him, the wealth that had silenced everyone around him, had limits. And in that quiet, clinical room, Cola understood something he had never learned in all his years of arrogance: money could not buy life. Fear settled over him like a storm, and for the first time, he felt the vulnerability that he had forced on others for so long. A heavy silence settled over Ao village as dusk fell, the sky painted in deep purples and blood-orange streaks. The dusty paths, once rigid with fear, now glimmered faintly in the last light of day. Word had spread quietly: Cola was failing. Not by violence, not by revenge, but by the helplessness that had finally caught him. And slowly, cautiously, the villagers emerged from their homes. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. Instead, they gathered under the old neem tree at the heart of the village, the same tree that had shaded their ancestors and witnessed decades of struggle. Women clasped babies to their chests, their wrappers soaked in sweat and tears. Men knelt on the hard earth, hands pressed together, heads bowed, whispering prayers that had long been silenced by fear. The elders, gray-headed and frail, stood with dignity, their voices steady as they guided the people in song and supplication, calling for peace and justice. From the balcony of his father's mansion, Cola's father watched quietly. His expression unreadable, a mixture of fear, frustration, and disbelief. Even he, who had bent laws and silenced voices for decades, could not intervene in what was unfolding. Wealth and influence could not enter this sacred space of collective prayer. Inside the dimly lit room, Cola lay on his bed, trembling, weak, his breaths shallow and uneven. The boy who had once ruled the village with laughter and cruelty now clutched at the sheets as if they could hold him together. He whispered faintly, almost to himself, I'm sorry, forgive me." The villagers' voices rose in a low, harmonious chant, a rhythm of hope and release. It was not hatred, nor vengeance, they only wanted balance restored. As Cola's eyes fluttered closed for the last time, a sense of calm seemed to ripple through the village. Fear lifted like a heavy fog. For the first time in years, the children laughed, timidly at first, then freely. The wind carried their voices across the dusty streets. And somewhere, high above, the village seemed to breathe again. Justice had arrived, not with fire or blood, but quietly, with the natural, inexorable weight of truth. Cola's reign of terror had ended, leaving behind a painful, yet profound, lesson. Power without accountability is fragile, and even the strongest shield can crumble under the weight of righteousness. The first light of dawn stretched across Ao village, spilling gold over the cracked earth and red-tiled roofs. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet soil from last night's brief rain, a scent that felt like cleansing. Slowly, the village awoke, not with the caution of fear, but with the tentative hope of freedom regained. Women stepped into the streets, baskets balanced on their heads, voices soft but filled with life as they greeted neighbors. Children ran barefoot through the dusty lanes, laughter spilling into the sky like a long-forgotten melody. The elders moved among them, steady and proud, guiding, teaching, and reminding the villagers of the lessons carved into their hearts through years of suffering. "Remember this," one elder whispered to a small crowd gathered under the neem tree. "No man, no matter how wealthy, no matter how feared, can bend truth forever. Power built on injustice has a shelf life." From a distance, behind the tall iron gates that once made the village tremble, Cola's father stood alone in the ruins of his mansion. His suit, once perfectly pressed, hung loosely on his frame. The polished floors were gone, replaced by broken stones and ashes. He gazed across the village, watching children play, women sing, and neighbors rebuild. Money still surrounded him, stacked in neat piles, but it had no warmth. Influence followed him like a shadow without substance. He was alive, yet hollow, an empty shell of the man who had once believed he could control everything. A young villager approached the gate, curiosity in her eyes. "Sir, will you help rebuild?" she asked softly. He shook his head slowly. "There is nothing I can give that they cannot already build themselves," he murmured, voice low, tinged with regret. "I only see what I have lost, and what I cannot reclaim." The sun climbed higher, illuminating the village in a light that seemed to promise renewal. Smoke from old fires mingled with the morning breeze, dissipating quickly, leaving only the sweet smell of earth and growth. And as the village worked together, quietly, with hands that had learned resilience, the truth became clear: power that silences justice, that bends law and fear for its own ends, does not vanish, it expires. Its collapse is inevitable, and life, no matter how long oppressed, always finds a way to breathe again. The village of Ao stood as proof: no crown, no gold, no borrowed strength can outlast the weight of truth.